Hello and welcome everyone to this week's episode of DoubleDM podcast, where Niels and I talk about dungeon mastering, giving advice, and just present you with new perspectives on your favorite ttrpg topics. And today that topic is factions. And creating factions is a very crucial part of game mastering because any group of people will have their own ideologies and own ways of thinking and goals. So thinking about what groups of people clump together under what way and how they do that and why they do that is a very important thing. So let's talk about that. But first, as every week, we will be talking about what happened to us in this week so you can stay up to date with DoubleDM and your two favorite hosts of a TTRPG talk show. And for that, I have to ask my co-host Niels how he's doing. So Niels, how are you doing today?
I was doing splendidly up until about half an hour ago.
That was the time we started meeting up for recordings, everyone.
Because yesterday was my birthday, and that was great.
Yeah,
Love
happy
that.
birthday again. Happy birthday.
Thank you. Later this evening, I'm going away on a weekend trip to Prague that I got for my birthday from a couple of colleagues from mine, mine, which is amazing, and I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah.
But then we wanted to record.
I'm so sorry that...
And my audio recording device said, well, fuck you, I'm not gonna do it. Cool. And stuff, you know?
To anyone that is wondering why Niels sounds weirdly or maybe differently, that is because his microphone decided to pitch him up 2 octaves. Octaves higher. So he's not sounding usually. I'm trying my best in editing to make sure that he sounds normal or that he sounds as well as he does in the recording of the full episode. But yeah, the thing is, the mic we got him for his birthday is arriving after our recording slot. So this is the last recording with that microphone. And I really, really hope that fixes the problem already.
I hope so too, because if not, I am gonna lose my sanity, which is close to being non-existent anyways at this point. If I factor out that whole mess, I had an amazing week. Lovely TTRPG session on Sunday, lovely TTRPG session on Monday, just doing nothing and having fun with friends on Tuesday, and then going to breakfast and dinner with my parents for my birthday and visiting a art gallery, actually. Here in Berlin, there is a special Salvador Dali surrealism exhibit, and we went to that. Really great. If you like art and watching art, at least try to think about it. It's a cool thing. There is an immersive room where all walls get projected art pieces on that work together and with music and shit. That's really cool. Yeah, it all works together and takes you through the different phases Dali went through with an explanation why, and then animated a bit with music, lights, blah, all of that. Really cool stuff. And yeah, TTRPG-wise, Sunday and Monday.
Yeah.
And Sunday was basically just one fight plus a bit of traveling through the usual snowy mountaintops in a blizzard. And yeah, I thought it was fun to use a demon creature that steals all the party's gold and eats it.
Yeah.
Demons that are attracted by feelings of envy or items that invoke feelings of envy and consuming those. And they have an attack that deals slashing damage. Not that much, but 10 times the slashing damage the creature that got hit loses in terms of gold pieces. And they have an action that they can consume these gold pieces or one item worth a couple of gold pieces to regain temporary hit points, which is really fun. And there were 3 of those.
Nice. Yeah. It's very fun to attack your characters in different ways than just damage. Taking valuables, destroying armorite. One very fun thing for me is called the Rust Monster. Rust Monster.
Yeah.
That slowly that destroys your equipment. It is just something so fun to put your players up against for the one very special reason that it creates cool moments in the game that don't happen all that often, especially in D&D, right? What I really like to do is make sure that my players think about their equipment. And that means tracking and encumbrance, for example. Because when you do that, you get your players sometimes going, oh, we can't carry that many weapons anymore. I have to figure out what weapons I want to take.
Sad fighter noises?
Yeah. Right? They could have a horse or a pack mule that they load up with their weapons and their equipment and they take everywhere. That's fine. But if you go into a cave and this pack mule isn't coming, maybe figure out what you take. Sure, D&D isn't necessarily the game for that. It doesn't really support the idea in general of choosing what weapon to take into your adventure because, first of all, there is no penalty to any kind of weapon in any kind of space. And second of all, the weapons are all just recolorings and reskins of each other anyway. So besides that, but yeah, the Rust Monster is a really cool thing for me to do. This demon, it sounds very amazing. Not for the fact that, oh yeah, it punishes the players in some certain other way. No, it gives my players a new point to interact with the game. Oh shit, now we don't have money. Oh shit, now I need to get new equipment. Oh no, my armor is destroyed. I need to fight differently now.
It just attacks the party at a different angle and forces them to do the same, to switch up their playstyle, their usual rut. And that's really nice.
Yeah.
That's just what makes it fun, because you as a game master have to think differently, and the players themselves have to think differently about the creature as well, which is so fun, especially if you do it once in a while. Not all the time, but just once here, once there. They go about every encounter the same way, but suddenly that doesn't work anymore. Well, what do you do now? Ta-da.
Okay. Sunday. You also had a second session on Sunday. How was that, Niels?
That was amazing. I really had a lot of fun.
Really?
Yeah, it didn't sound like it in the session itself.
Really?
But yeah, it was a lot of fun, especially when I think about it after the fact.
Explain to me why.
Because I had to solve a riddle.
Yeah.
A bitchy riddle, to be exact.
Yeah.
Because Emil thought it was fun, especially now, after the fact it was, but to give me a cryptography riddle. Let me give you a list about the things that I knew about cryptography before this riddle. It starts now. End. Period. I didn't know shit. Except cryptography existed and there were a lot of different ways to encrypt shit. That's it. And then he teased me all the time with, oh, that's such an easy riddle, man. Blah, 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 blah. But there were hints, so that's fine. I was just a bit frustrated at the moment. But once I got that one hint, I got working. And I'm looking forward to the next bitchy riddle you give me. This will be fun. I think so.
See, the thing was, I thought to myself, why do we always make fun of our players not being able to solve second grade riddles? Let's give them a fucking academic level riddle.
Yeah.
And you solve it as in the same amount that you would do a second grade puzzle. I don't see why we shouldn't do harder puzzles. No, the thing is about this puzzle riddle type of adventure that your character is undergoing in our cyberpunk game is that I wanted to have this online ARG type of thing where you have to think outside the box, but it's never a focus. It's never a priority. It's never needed to advance to the next stage of our overall plotline. It is a thing that is there and exists. And if you want to figure it out, I will make sure that you figure it out. If you just let it sit there, I'm not going to help you. I'm just going to let it sit there. Because when you want to solve it, there's always a way.
Yeah.
You just have to watch out for everything that you've been given and question everything.
Yeah, and why I was a bit frustrated at first during the session was this is a type of riddle, not just because it was cryptography, but thinking outside the box is what I wanted to do. But I never thought to think that way out of the box, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
About a topic that I have no clue of. But now that I know in which direction, in terms of thinking outside of the box and having a treasure hunt more or less to solve a riddle, that I have to find one clue and then follow that and connect that to others, I think I will have a better time with the next riddle. Maybe. I don't know. But at least I have now an idea of different angles that I can attack the problem with that would still work, or just try out different stuff and not just here's a logic puzzle, solve it. That's the big part that's normally the things that I am used to solve is just quote unquote simple logic puzzles, even if they are pretty hard. But but just with everything that is given to me, I can still solve it.
And right, one of the fun things about this riddle is that I'm making sure that when you are able to solve something to get to the next stage, to unlock the next layer, whatever you want to call it, that you also basically can do so outside of the session, presenting you with all the hints and all the things that you know, and then say, if you have questions, ask them to me directly. You don't have to wait for the session for that to happen. Obviously, right, in the session, you have the time to do that, focus on the puzzle, so I know that you're going to solve it in the session. But if you think to yourself, okay, yeah, I want to do that, this sounds fun, this is a fun exercise or something, go with it. Yeah, there will be some puzzles that will be easier, some that will be harder, some that will be different, some that will be very simple and understandable. And it all comes down to, I think one of the big things about this is, right, since it isn't actually even a subplot line of something, it is detached from anything that you guys are doing. It is just there. And if you want to focus on it, you will unlock a certain subplot line in that, obviously.
Nice wordplay. So you guys know my character in that Cyberpunk campaign's handle is Lock. So,
Ha. Funny. Yeah, your character, Locke, now has, as the first one, solved the second puzzle of that thing. So we will see what happens with the third. I don't know when I'm going to finish the third, because these riddles take time to make, actually.
Yeah, I get that. Can't wait for the next one.
Yeah,
it'll be fun.
I can't wait for the next session. Also because our MedTech's house just blew up as a cliffhanger, as well as
something.
As well as the rocker boy wanted to visit his ex, and your solo just got called by an anonymous number to get out her old handler. So there is a lot of different plot lines, because with the Cyberpunk game generally, I also wanted to basically try out a different approach to GMing, right? Because I never want to do stuff the same way. And with your group, I went, okay, why don't I give you guys 9, 10 plots at the same time? See which ones you take, see which ones you neglect, and then make sure that the ones you neglect will have an impact later on, and those that you solve will have an impact later on, just in a different way. If you neglect a certain plot line, that will reflect badly on you. And if you do something great, that will reflect greatly on you. And you guys are just having to decide what to do.
And I think that fits pretty damn well into a Cyberpunk campaign, because it's all about getting to be known as a netrunner or an edge runner, and making a name for yourself, and being an awesome person that there will be stories of, and drinks named after you. So seeing how the drink will be named after you by deciding on what missions or what plot lines to follow is an amazing way to implement that.
I already have an idea for what the drink is gonna be called if Locke solves the final puzzle of this treasure hunt.
You had my curiosity. Now you have my attention.
The locksmith.
Nice.
Because you've unlocked the final.
Cool. Like it.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. One more TTRPG session this week, actually. On the birthday of one of our friends. I was there on Monday, and we had a small little one shot in a new setting that he bought online, and just ran a quick little dungeon. Great job. It was a lot of fun. Awesome times. And yeah, that's about it for my week. How about you? How was your week?
My week was great. I am on vacation, right? So I'm having a lot of time to do stuff for myself and taking care, sleep in, do all of the normal vacation stuff. Yeah. Besides that, I had sessions. Yeah, I had a session on Saturday, aside from the Cyberpunk session that we had on Sunday. A very long session of the Dark Eye, where we basically just traveled and talked with different NPCs and solved problems. We built a bridge.
Okay.
In a day, and I'm not talking about a normal wooden bridge. No, we're talking about a fully fledged stone brick bridge.
As you do. We
solved a more or less political conflict between two baronies or counties and the empress herself of this kingdom, or not kingdom, but empire. So, yeah.
So pretty much a normal Tuesday for a high-level fantasy group, right?
Pretty much. Yeah, that was a lot of fun. Had a great time playing for 12 hours straight, more or less. I have a session today, which is Storm King's Thunder, where we all lost our memories and now have to figure out what our characters actually are.
Awesome.
We're still in the first settlement or first place face and have to clear it out from goblins. Some of our characters are a little bit more violent than the others. My character doesn't necessarily see a reason why she should be violent yet. These goblins haven't attacked her and she sees no reason to fight.
Yeah.
So yeah, where the others are like, okay, I punched the goblin in the face. And I'm like, what the fuck?
Calm down, man.
I have a session on Saturday, which is, I am pretty sure you played this adventure I am gonna play.
Pretty sure, yeah. That's why I didn't spoiler anything or didn't tell everything about that. Just a quick question. What are you playing in that?
I am playing Warlock Raccoon.
Nice. A Warlock Raccoon. Hell yeah, the trash panda.
Yeah, the trash panda that tells ghost stories and tells everyone that they are haunted.
Perfect.
So yeah.
I played a revolutionist kobold who's too dumb to do anything. But by that, because of that book's kobold traits, I got bonuses because I was too dumb. And we had another kobold with us, and they have a feature called stackable intellect. The more dumb kobolds there are, the better they get at stuff, which is really fun.
Yeah,
just two kobolds dumb as a brick, perfect.
Yeah, shout out to the people that made the Delver's Guide to the Beast World, because that is what we will be playing. I will be playing on Saturday. You've played on Monday last week, so yeah. But very fun.
Definitely tell me what you played, because then we can see if you really made the same one shot twice or not.
I think we've talked enough about ttrpgs. That is on for us. So let's jump right into our episode on factions, and we will hear you all after our break. Hey listener, how are you enjoying the show so far? Tell us about it in whatever way you see fit. Go to our social media pages and add us or DM us about your favorite episode of the show. We would love to hear from you on what impact our show might have had on your home games. Or you could review us on your podcast app of choice and leave us a nice message with a 5-star review. And if you want to go above and beyond, bring a friend into the fold. Tell them about our show and refer us to them so they can get a piece of the pie as well. Thank you for listening to DoubleDM and joining us on this incredible journey.
So Emil, I told you about the 2 new players in my group. And for one of them, I have to create a new guild, a thieves guild kind of situation. Because he's playing as a resurrected character that lost his memory from the times before. But he knows, or he wanted to have a criminal background in some capacity, but wanted me to handle all of that before he got resurrected, because he wanted to get surprised as well. So now I'm in the situation of having to create a new thieves guild, or in general a criminal faction of some sorts in one of the cities that in my setting. And I thought this might be a fun thing to discuss with you in general, creating factions, because I think factions make a game just that much more intricate. At least in my experience, creating good or great factions can be a difficult task. So I thought, hey, why not talk about that with the knowledgeable person that is my co-host Emil, right?
Oh fuck. I am considered an expert. Shit.
Kind of, I guess. So let's start with the first question right in your face. What is your take on factions? Do you like them? Do you use them? Why? And all of that.
I mean, it is basic nature of nearly everything to band together, to seek refuge in the herd, or band together to be better able to function as a society or anything when we are playing TTRPGs. And we have a sprawling, interesting world of different characters. There will be factions. Because it is normal for beings, or for most beings, right? Not all beings, obviously, but most beings to clump together, to be social with each other. And when you're social with each other, you create those factions. Because a faction, and this is one of the things that I think in the talk about factions need to be distinguished, a faction can be nearly any cluster of mortal beings together, let's say that, or humans, even though, right, in D&D you have elves and dwarves. We could just just going to say humans for all of them, for all of the lineages, as one big term. Anything can be a faction where they clump together. A party, a player character party is a faction.
Yeah.
They have their own desires. They have a goal, and basically they have the funds and stuff. Like, right, they're a group of people working together to achieve one common goal. Now, obviously, you could also say that a country is a faction, and you would be correct. A country is a faction. However, you could also say, right, a faction doesn't have to be a country. A faith based around one deity in your D&D world is a faction. Any organization of people banding together to achieve one common goal, that is a faction. And that is a very basic thing. So factions are a very basic thing you need in your D&D games. And I think I, for example, didn't do in one of my first ttrpg games is create interesting factions.
Yeah.
And when you create interesting factions, you have it so much easier, in my opinion, to create NPCs as well. You have it very easy to create anything in your world when you have the basic directions groups of people go. Like, for example, in the Tyranny of Dragons game, that's where I learned this. You have a lot of factions. You have the Cult of the Dragon Queen. You have the Sword Coast, which is comprised of the Emerald Enclave, the Harpers, the Order of the Gauntlet, the Zentarum, the Lord's Alliance, right? All of these factions. And these factions all are different in each other. They all have their own goals. They all have their own funds and ways to achieve those goals. But what they have is give you a great template for every NPC that is in that faction. Because while not every NPC in that faction is necessarily the same NPC, it is very easy to say when this faction wants to do good around the world, most NPCs, probably all NPCs in that faction that are actually in that faction will adhere to that statement. We want to do good around the world. And that is super great because with factions, you have basically very big entities in your D&D games that direct the course of play for me. Because, for example, it could also say a country is a faction because it is. And this country has this goal. This country has these funds. This country has this, and this, right? And I have a very big list and comprehensive text for this faction, for this country. With that, I have a lot of building blocks to create a good adventure because I can create conflicts. And what do you want more than conflicts in your world? Because conflicts are what? Correct. The place where player characters are needed. The place where you want your players to be. The place where you can let your players shine with their characters and their ideas. That happens only through conflict. And factions are a great way to make conflict.
Exactly. And that's where I struggled in the past was I made factions that were, that they were on paper were cool, interesting, intricate and all of that. But I always forgot that I had to make the factions interact in some way to have a point of interaction for my players or for my characters to interact with the world itself or with the factions or with the people of the factions and whatever the fuck, right? Just a point where the interaction can take place.
Yeah.
That's just something that I learned more or less recently when I think about 2 years ago now when I started this new campaign, quote unquote new campaign, where I had to make a faction just based off of the backstory of one of my characters or players that I started this campaign with that didn't get here recently. Because they wanted to play a blood hunter and wanted to go with the Order of the Lycan, blah, 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 blah. All of that, right? Backstory is shit. But the thing is, they weren't level 3 or weren't a level 3 blood hunter when we started the campaign. And I thought to myself, hey, why not make it a faction and make it a kind of a quest whether they achieve that level up for that specific subclass or for that multiclass, but make it individually tailored to that character and have a order where they can learn the things that they would learn from their subclass, not just because they are awesome and can do that. I mean, that's one point. But someone had to teach that character those ways. So I thought, hey, why not make the Order of the Lycan a faction that interacts with the world itself? So I had to create that. And then I thought, hey, okay, how can I include that into the main story in some way? And it just got spun out of control, more or less. Then I had to create another faction and another and another. And that's the beauty of factions in itself, because they are connected to each other in some way.
Yeah.
They are always connected, because if you're not connected or if a faction isn't connected, it isn't really needed, necessary, or in general just there, because factions always have a goal and ways to achieve that goal, or how they want to try to achieve that goal.
Yeah.
And therefore they have to interact with something.
Yeah, I think that is very true. To just expand on that, right? A faction needs to be present for it to be existent, right? You can create the best intelligence agency and best spy network in your game. If those spies and those intelligence officers and whatever else are never noticed, never present, because they're so good at what they do, the faction you created is useless, because at the end of the day, everything needs to happen in play. Everything needs to be shown in play. Anything that isn't in play is inherently less, I want to say it's not useless, but it's less valuable than what is in play. And that's why your faction needs to be present. Your faction needs to be there. Your faction needs to be interactable. And it gets interactable through a lot of different ways, right? Through having resources and means to an end, to having that end that they want, right? And one big thing, the people of that faction. Because at the end of the day, what I said in the beginning is still true. A faction is first and foremost about its people. Because otherwise, these people wouldn't be in the faction. Your faction can, at a glance's view, be as boring as you want it to be, or it can be as interesting as you want it to be. It doesn't matter if the people inside that faction aren't interesting, especially to the player characters, because only then they will interact with it. But you need the people to be interesting as well. Obviously, when you create a good faction, you have a very easy time creating those NPCs. That's why we're talking about factions. When you create a good faction with a very good goal or a very good secret, for example, you have a very easy time creating a good NPC that has part of that goal in them, part of that secret in them, or that knows of that secret. You can create NPCs that are very powerful inside of that faction. By making that faction powerful, you therefore make that NPC very powerful, right?
Yeah.
A faction is more or less a cluster for you to create NPCs. And NPCs are the first thing that comes to mind for anyone when you think about what makes a world or a TTRPG campaign good. They're not the thing that when I ask someone what makes TTRPGs good, no one will say NPCs. Obviously. But NPCs are the first point of interaction most of the time. They are the grandest and biggest point. And a faction gives you a cluster of these NPCs, a big chunk of NPCs. And you want that because now you have a populated faction. And now you can, whenever you need an NPC from that faction, take a lot of different aspects from that faction and add some other things into the mix that make this NPC different from all other NPCs in the faction. And now you have an interesting NPC. And you didn't have to do a lot of stuff. You just take from that faction and create an NPC from that. And that only works if your faction works for the NPCs that are part of it, or the player characters that are part of it for that matter. It needs to work for the people that are in it.
Exactly.
If the mission statement of a faction doesn't align with the way they do things, the NPCs of that faction will not make sense. If the faction doesn't make sense, an NPC created for that faction doesn't make sense.
Exactly. And that is the thing, what I struggle with still at sometimes, is making or creating a goal for said faction that makes sense in the world. Because I think that that is a very subjective and very case-by-case basis where you can't really say, do these steps to make a great goal for any faction, because it depends on the faction. It depends on the setting that you're running. It depends on the system. It depends on these, that, and that, and that, on all of that. So I think it's difficult to just give advice on how to make great goals. But one advice that I would give is make the goals make sense in a way. If you have if you have the history of the creation of that faction, then you have your goal of that faction, more or less. Whatever that goal might have become in the future or in the present is completely not irrelevant. That's the wrong word, but it is irrelevant for the...
it is a non-factor in the current...
Exactly. As long as you have the first goal when the faction was created, whatever that goal may be, you have a coherent way of translating that towards the faction. Once you have that, you have a rough direction where the faction might be going. And then you can build off of that. Or you could work the other way around. That's completely fine, and whatever the fuck you want. It's your world. You create the factions. It's just the process for me. I usually
it's world building, right? You can start wherever you want, you can end wherever you want, you can do as much as you want in the step between, but you're gonna still have the same points as most other people do, at least in general, right? You will have, for every faction, you will have what does this faction actually want. How you get there is completely up to you. But okay, Niels.
Yeah.
You say you struggle with that. You say you have problems with that. So let's play through it. Do you have a faction that you're currently struggling with creating that we could just now try to creatively do here in this episode?
I would love to, but I can't on the air.
I hate you.
Yeah, but let's just create a one anyways. Let's just pull something out of my ass. Give me a second.
Okay.
Let's go with a Hag Coven.
Okay, sure. That's a very unique faction already, because a Hag Coven is only 3 hags. Nothing more. That's a faction. Okay, sure. Wouldn't have been my first choice, but interesting nonetheless. I would... Actually, it's one of the edge cases of faction, because I wouldn't consider a group of 3 hags to be an exact faction.
Okay, then let's go with something else.
No, I'm ready to go with that idea. I'm ready to go with that idea, especially if we twist it a bit.
Okay, sure. Let's twist it.
Let's not say that the Hag Coven is the entire faction, but the leading organization of a faction is that Hag Coven.
That sounds good.
So it's not just a Hag Coven, it's basically more that like a cult, and the leaders are just 3 hags. So we already have our leaders. They are hags. They are fake creatures. Now, it's a cult. What else do we do? What else do we need? What do we do with that now?
Yeah, then I would usually start to think about what they want to do.
Okay, it's 3 hags. And I would, for example, first of all, start how the faction is built. So what I'm thinking is these 3 hags basically surmounted a great following around them through pacts and curses.
Yeah.
And it's more or less a cult of people that have no other choice but to worship them. Okay.
Sounds good.
So we have that. So that faction only wants what those 3 hags want. It's not these 3 hags have written a contract that says what they want and they abide by it. They have the complete and utter whim to do whatever they want and decide from that. So what do these 3 hags want? What do hags usually want? And it can be as simple as one word. And I think important for people here, first of all, when you want to make a goal for a faction, try using only 1 or 2 words. You can obviously write out the mission statement later on.
Yeah.
Focus on 1 or 2 words to figure out that faction's goal, that faction's purpose. It is very precise in giving your faction an aspect you need, because your faction should be full of aspects that make it up, that make people interested, that make your characters interested, that make the faction unique and multifaceted. And for that, you need one simple aspect. That is their goal.
I think I can boil it down to 2 words.
Okay.
Control and influence.
That's 3 words.
Yeah, but or use the end symbol. I don't give a shit. Control, comma, influence.
They want control. They want influence. I think we can obviously boil those both down to 1 word. Choose either one of the words, because they both mean kind of the same thing. So let's just go with influence. Yeah. They want influence. These 3 hags want influence. I mean, it's fair to say that hags want influence. Now the question is, okay, they want influence. You have you have a basic faction already. You have basically a mission statement. You have a reason why these people banded together, and you more or less have already an interesting twist. You can always put twists into your thing. Our cult is led by a Hag Coven. That's a twist, kinda at least. Okay, so you have those 2 things: the people and why they're together, and the goal. Now we could talk about a lot of different other factors, but the one important thing is now we ask questions about the goal first. Okay, so Niels, we said influence. Let's just go with influence or control and influence. I don't care.
No, let's go
with what or who do they want influence over? And it doesn't have to be a specific thing, right? It can always be a general thing. These hags want influence over an area, over a country, over a person. You can always be general at first.
Let's go a bit abstract and say influence over emotions.
Okay, they want influence over emotions.
Make it weird.
Yeah, sure. They want influence over emotions. Okay, how do they get that? What are their ways to get that? And again, for people doing this at home with us, be abstract at first. You can always write down exact sentences later on. When you create this faction, especially if it's, for example, you're creating a faction that is only gonna be met in 10 sessions time in your games, don't be too direct necessarily. You can be abstract, you can be vague, and putting down the fundamentals first helps. So how do they achieve that influence over emotion?
Let's go with deals and pacts.
Okay.
The classic.
So deals and pacts, sure. So with that, my question becomes, we have a hag coven cult of people that are cursed and in contracts and pacts made to worship them. Their goal is to have more influence. So they want to further their cult. And they want influence over emotions. And they do that through their contracts. So with just that is a 4-sentence or a 4-bullet point faction. I have everything I need to create an interesting faction, and I can write out everything. Yeah. More or less. Obviously, I need a lot of creative juice for that. I need to put on the right music playlist or something to write, but generally, I have what I need. Yeah. I never thought of creating just abstract single bullet points for certain questions that are the backbone of every faction, and then at a later point connecting these and fleshing those out. Yeah. But that's great, man. That's great. The backbone of factions are always the people in that faction, the reason they are together, the goal that they have, which can be the same as the reason, but it can also not be, and kind of important, the way they achieve their goal. Those are the 4 important things you need for a faction. And when you have those written down, you can flesh out everything. You can get a name, you can get a history, you can flesh out NPCs, because now every NPC that my players meet of this cult is probably a very sorrow NPC. They're trapped in a contract they can't get out of, and they have no other choice but to obey their masters. Yeah. Even though they don't want to, but they have to. So, I mean, that's kind of a cool faction, because it's gonna be a very interesting faction to interact with for the players. What do they do? These people are in a contract. Do they try to help them? Or do they see this faction as more antagonistic and say, no, all these people are still evil to us? You have an interesting point of interaction already. And that is the next thing I want you to do after you have those simple things written down, what a faction actually is. The people inside that faction, the reason they're together, their goal, and their ways to achieving that goal. I want you to figure out how that is going to be interactive with the player characters. Because that is at the end of the day what we do for. The 5th bullet point should be, or it's not necessarily a bullet point anymore. It is going to be a little bit longer than that. It's a little bit be more abstract than a bullet point. What and why and how does this faction interact with the player characters, or how do they interact with that faction? Yeah, but I think in that instance, it is easier once you have the 4 main aspects down to just take that 5th one and link it back to the other 4 pre-existing definitions, you could say, of your faction, to create a way the people in that faction or the faction itself interacts with the world around it and the player characters, because you are creating links. Yes, we know the leaders are 3 hags, a coven of hags. So then you can think about what the people are trying to do or saying to get them to join that cult or get into a pact with one of the hags or with the coven. You don't have to write out specific wording, specific sentences, what these characters would say. But just in general, they want to talk, or they will talk, or are forced to talk, player characters or any other NPC, into joining a pact with the hags. That's the interesting thing, right, about this hag coven cult. They don't get their members through other acquisition ways. They need to have them willingly sign the contract to join the faction, which is kind of how everyone joins a faction if you think about it, but you get what I mean, right? It's a different kind of contract. This faction is very limited in their members, which is an interesting fact that you can pull from that, because maybe this faction isn't necessarily that big, but the power that Hag Coven holds over its few hundred people, part of it, is immense. These people, while they do not have a choice, will die for the Hag Coven. Yeah. Most people in other factions might not necessarily die for the faction, but they would definitely fight for it, but they wouldn't die, they wouldn't go to their certain death. This Hag Coven makes sure that these people do not have another choice but to do that. Yeah, and I think that's another aspect that you can link back to the means of achieving that goal. How far will the members go? Linking all of that together creates just ways for your characters to interact with the faction itself, or the faction to interact with other NPCs. And I think that this is another big part when you're creating factions in general. What other
groups do they interact with and why? Where are the friction points between two different factions? That is where problems arise. If one faction just can do whatever and nothing is there's no friction whatsoever in the world with this faction, there won't be any problems with that where the player characters can interact with. But as soon as you have some sort of friction, an oppressive government, for example, would be a faction. Plain out, simple, there. If there weren't any other factions to interact with, that wouldn't matter. There will always be other factions to interact with, so it's just a hypothetical. But if there wouldn't be any other factions and everyone got on board with that, why ever, blah, 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 there wouldn't be any friction, so no point of interaction, so no need for any character to interact with that faction ever again. But as soon as there is something, some other faction, for example, a rebellious group, blah, blah, you have a point of interaction or a point of friction where players can interject and act upon their knowledge and in regards to what the both factions want, why, and their means and all that you've created beforehand.
Yeah, and there comes exactly into play why I think that you don't necessarily need other factions to have friction. Your player characters are a faction as a group.
So you always have
one faction. And that is why you need other factions, because that way your player characters can go up against bigger systems, not just people, but bigger systems. I mean, everyone loves capitalism is the bad guy of my campaign as a trope. You get that only through having a capitalistic fucking faction that is the enemy, that is imposing this system. You don't get that otherwise. If there wouldn't be another faction, and I mean, it would be very hard to not have another faction, because at the end of the day, you still want your game to be normal and play out normally in whatever way you call normal as a table. And that just means that the factions are going to exist, because NPCs are going to exist. And when NPCs exist, they will band together. And therefore you have a faction, right? A faction can also just be that a few of the local hamlets have decided to band together to be better represented in the government or protest against the governments imposing taxes on their crops. Even if it's just 10 farmers, that is kind of a faction. Because those 10 farmers are still creating friction in your games.
Yeah, and now gets now I'm gonna hit you with a question. Are factions creating friction, or is friction creating factions?
Both. I think that friction is only created when two forces meet. Obviously, right? Physics. And those forces are the factions. So you need two factions to create friction. But one faction doing something in your world will create another faction that opposes them. Because if someone does something you don't like, you oppose them. Anyone kind of creates the opposition as long as they do stuff badly enough. If you're not doing something that everyone agrees with, which is impossible, more or less, except for maybe very few edge cases, you would think, but maybe not.
Yeah, but even there.
But generally, when you do something and you're a faction, which, right, you have an opposition. You create your own opposition. And therefore, you always create friction. Always create those moments of tension for player characters to be there. You don't even have that. You have the player characters. And they create their own friction. Let's be fucking real. They create their own friction. Player characters often do search their own fucking things. So it's okay.
Something that just came to my mind is in player character groups, there's always some friction between other character or between the characters themselves. Even if you just have one faction, even if that would be possible, let's just stay in that hypothetical realm. There's still always gonna be friction within one faction because people aren't the same. People always will be different from each other. Always interpret things differently. Yeah, we might have the same goal, but different means to that end. There's still gonna be differences within the people joined in that faction or under that umbrella faction that is there. Then you create something or a group that rather sees this interpretation of the goal as the right one, and the other one and the other half sees that interpretation of the goal as the right one, and now they split, and now you have two factions. You can have factions within factions.
I mean, that's one thing that I just thought about, right? You have a faction, and as soon as it gets big enough, it will have sub-factions. It will have sub-factions. And why? Because inside that faction is enough space for friction. The call for factions in your TTRPGs doesn't come from factions. It comes from the friction that you want your factions to have. And you want the friction be between just single NPCs. But when you have them between bigger entities, which are factions, you create something better with that. You have a bigger conflict. You have a bigger thing to solve.
The bigger a faction gets, sometimes having sub-factions to focus on different aspects of the umbrella faction might be beneficial to the goal of the whole faction. Let's say, for example, a thieves guild or a criminal organization whatsoever. You have that main faction with a main goal, and all of the members are part of that faction and see the same goal. But each member or a small group of members focuses on different things. One focuses on extortion. One focuses on smuggling. One just focuses on spying and getting information and brokering those. Those are all different factions within this criminal faction that is currently happening or existing. They will have friction between each other, saying who is more important to the main goal or whatsoever. But since you split the workload, you can more focus on the things that everyone is good at and blah 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 blah. So they focus on the differences between the people within one faction and create different compartments of that faction, so creating new subfactions, which can be beneficial to the whole faction in itself. That's some really important or really interesting things that happen nearly in every faction that I've created or will create in the future, or that is created in the real world. Because look at countries as a faction. You have sub-factions in that would be counties, cities, districts, blocks, streets, all of that. Those can all be abstractly boiled down to different factions, more or less.
Yeah.
That's just something that happens the bigger one faction gets. They compartmentalize.
Yeah. One important thing about factions that we need to talk about, right? Factions are about the NPCs. We've said that countless times already. Factions have an identity. And NPCs are part of that identity. They base part of their identity on that faction identity, and they also kind of base the faction identity on them. If your hacks basically only attract a certain type of people, that will be part of the identity. The hack coven that we had as an example only has, I don't know. The hacks have a very successful rate with gamblers because they have no other way out anymore. Now, that will be part of the identity of that faction. Most of the people inside that faction are gamblers or have gambled their life away. That will be part of the identity of every single person you meet in an encounter with the faction. Kind of, at least, right? Not everyone necessarily has to be a gambler, but maybe the entire mood and vibe of that faction is that most of these people have lost everything. This is their last resort. They are desperate.
Yeah.
And when that faction is desperate, its people are desperate. Or when its people are desperate, the faction is. Because the people make the faction and the faction makes the people.
Yeah.
You need an identity for your faction. And I think after you've put on those 4 points and found out how it interacts with the player characters and the world around it, make an identity out of that. What type of people are in this faction? I don't know. What are they like? What is their mood? What is the general vibe? Make an identity. Make a profile for the people inside that faction. Because from that, you get a profile for the faction. A general mood board could be very useful to you. When you have a fucking faction, make a Pinterest board for the faction. And if every single image on that Pinterest board is black and white, the fucking faction is going to be black and white.
Yeah, moods in general, or keep it general, is especially with the mood and how everything or the faction feels, is a good thing, I think, because then you leave yourself room to create a lot of individual differences between the characters that are in that faction and that make up the faction, but still have them recognized as members of that faction. They're still somehow connected through the way they interact, through the way they talk, through the way they present themselves, but still are different, to see them as different people and not just hollow entities that will do the bidding of that faction leader. That can also be one of the identities, but then leave yourself room to create some unique things, some differences between the NPCs or characters in certain factions, because, I mean, people are different. Let's focus on that. We aren't the same, and that's good.
Yeah.
We have differences. Everyone has differences. No one person is alike.
Yeah.
But they share some traits. They might share some traits.
And especially when they come from the same background,
Exactly.
they share more.
Exactly.
Obviously, this is not to say that everyone from the same background is the same person. Obviously not. When you come from a certain country, you have some sort of identity with that country. Maybe even when you come from a local community, you have a very strong sense of self in that community. And the same thing goes for a faction. A faction gives you a sense of self.
Yeah.
A faction gives you an idea of these are people with the same goal, same ideas, and same interests as me. I consider them, at first, maybe it's colleagues, people, acquaintances. They become friends. They become your family. And now this is important for NPCs that you create inside a faction. Figure out how strong that NPC's bond to that faction is. Because that gives you a lot of idea of how they see the faction, how they see the other people of that faction, and how they relate to the faction itself.
Yeah.
Because someone that has a very strong bond to that faction will do a lot of things for that faction. They will consider the people of the faction their family, not just people that they work with.
Yeah. Look at your friend groups when you start a new campaign. As abstract as that sounds, let's view that as a faction. You're all different people that came together under one purpose, to play TTRPGs. Ta-da! You have your goal, and you have your way of achieving that goal is to meet up in Discord or in person or wherever, or in a text chat, and then play a game. And then you see you have some shared traits. You all like TTRPGs, you all like each other or whatever. And then you have the connection between you and your friends. The same goes for every faction in your worlds that you create. You always have similar traits, vastly distinct people. And those will band together just because they have some similar ideas, some similar traits, or just in general love the same idea, love the same things. They will always share those things. They always share their new foundings. And when you create music, you find some people that also create music and exchange with each other. You have not just some sort of connection, you have a connection between themselves. And that's the same for every faction in your worlds. And then how loyal, quote unquote, you are to that faction. How far would you go? What does that entail? And what does that mean when I say I would go all out for that faction? To what degree? And all of that. These are beautiful, unifying traits for vastly distinct people to still keep their individualism, but still have one group that they kind of adhere to and can fall back to, a community to rely on, and people to interact with and share their story with. And I think that's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, 100%. And it needs to shine through in your play. And Niels, how do you do that as a GM? How do you make sure that aspect, those faction aspects, those stories of those people, they shine through?
To put it simply, create stories around those people. Use factions to give out hooks. Use the same people over and over again to have a fixed interaction point with that faction, to have a sense of familiarity with that one person of that faction. For example, in my or with the Order of the Lycans, they always have that one quote-unquote lieutenant that they interact with. They know that person, they like that person, or whatever, right? They always have that one point of interaction. So they get to see many facets of that NPC. But with every other NPC from that faction that they interact with, they see similarities to that person, but differences as well. So the best way to show it is to have reoccurring NPCs from said faction to show many facets, but also multiple different NPCs from the same faction to show the similarities and create storylines about those people. That's the best way to, I think, to show these multifaceted people in every multifaceted faction. Create stories around them, as dumb as that sounds.
Use them, right?
Exactly.
Bring them to the players, because that is what you need to do as a GM. Your players are, I like to think about TTRPGs, as dumb as it sounds, as sometimes when the players are basically a stationary camera, focusing in one direction, they aren't able to move. And you as the GM are able to move the world around them so they see something. And they obviously are allowed to say, okay, no, we want to move the world into that direction, or right, we want to look the other way, for example, right? However way you want to see it. The players are able to control the camera, and you are able to control the world around the camera. And you're allowed to push something into view. You're allowed to highlight the cult of these three hacks in the hopes of your players picking up on it, because they meet someone that basically, in some desperate attempt, does something. The players stop him, or maybe not, and they find through some fucked up means, for example, this person breaks their contract and is free of the cult. That is a plot hook, because now that person is free. The players realized that he was prisoned or enchained by something before, and now they want to figure out what that is. And you only do that through pushing something into their view. You're not saying them you need to finish off that cult. No, you're pushing them that person into their face that they can clearly see is an interesting person with an interesting hook, with an interesting storyline. You want to be part of that, right, players? You want to be part of this. Have fun with this. Cults are great factions because they're oftentimes very great antagonists. And I think that you can especially learn from cults is that you want your cults to be believable. You want there to be a reason people actually are part of this cult, right? For example, with Tyranny of Dragons, the thing always was that my players always thought that Tiamat would just basically scorch the earth to the ground until there's no one left anymore. And I was like, what? Yeah, sure, no one would be part of that, or at least very few psychopaths would be part of that, but not to the scale that Tyranny of Dragons cult is. And they were like, why isn't that? Well, because maybe none of you ever dared to actually figure out what the actual meaning of the cult was. Yeah, the fanatics of the cult will say that Tiamat will burn every city to the ground. Not because it's the city she needs to burn to the ground, but because it's where people hide from her rule. Tiamat wants to rule the earth. And those people in that cult are promised a position in her ruling. Maybe they're not necessarily powerful, but they will survive and they will have it better than yet in this world. So sure, some of them sign up, especially if they're desperate enough. And yeah, you want your antagonists to be believable. You want your factions to be believable. What you learn from that is it's about the people.
Exactly.
It's always about the people.
And I think with that, I don't have anything else to add to factions and making them great, awesome, and enjoyable and interactable. Just stick to the people and make it about them.
Focus on what's important. People.
And I think with that, thank you all for listening. Hear you on the next one, and bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode of DoubleDM. It appears you liked this one. What we had to say and our advice helped you. Why not show us how we helped you in a rating, or even write a review detailing us how we helped? You can do this on the platform that you are listening on right now. It's just a few clicks, doesn't take long, and helps us out. It gets us out there and our advice into more ears of more people. Thanks again for listening and joining us on this amazing journey. Have a great day, and hear you on the next one. Bye-bye.